All right, welcome back in. We are doing part 2 of our pregnancy series today. And I told Amy before we started recording, I have no idea where we're going to land on this. I'm going to be honest with you. I have in my head what we're going to get done during this episode, but there's a lot here. I do know from the jump, we are going to be very light on pelvic floor stuff, talking about pregnancy. In this one, I will say, hey, pelvic floor is a thing. But there's so much with pelvic floor that I think it deserves its own episode. So we will do that. I don't know if I think at some juncture I will have a pelvic floor physio on as well. So that might be when as we do that, or I might do one and then do another one with a pelvic floor physio. Because again, I think that it's a very common thing for women, particularly postpartum, to deal with pelvic floor issues. And I don't think it's talked about enough. And it's also a lot of women kind of just accept it as the reality.
Yep.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. But if you pee when you laugh, cough, sneeze, or jump, you are not alone. And
mine's only when I do jump rope.
Jump rope. Well,
but only if I'm holding the rope. If I'm not holding the rope and doing the exact same motions, I'm completely fine. So it's like add one more element. I know it makes no sense. Add one more element, and I'm like, well,
yeah,
can no longer.
So there's a lot that can be done on it. So know that is not necessarily where we're going to spend a lot of time this episode. So if you're looking for that, it'll be on a different episode. But what we are going to cover today is, at a minimum, the first 3 trimesters, likely the 4th trimester as well. If you're a dude listening to that and you don't know what I'm talking about, that's what has been referred to as that first 3 months postpartum, because it's very much a part of pregnancy. In the journey of pregnancy, that initial time it's not like, oh, okay, all of a sudden that's there. I'm going to do the best that I can to kind of cover a lot of the things there, particularly on the training and the nutrition side of things, but also on kind of the mindset and the perspective side of things that we talk about. There may be some overlap with some things that I said in part 1. If you have already listened to that, if you haven't, I would go back and listen to that. That was kind of an overall framework for all of this. We're going to get into some of the nitty gritty today. So this is this is the most notes that I have for an episode, because I want to make sure that I hit that we've done, including the stress episode, which was full of a lot of information.
That was a lot. Yeah. So good.
So
nice work, Jeff.
we got a lot coming. If you're watching on YouTube, or I think we put these out as video episodes on Spotify too. So this is a certification that I am 98% of the way through. I just have to take the test. If you can tell, this is a fairly substantial textbook. It's the pre and postnatal coaching certification. So I've read that entire textbook. I just haven't finished all the tests. It's by Girls Grown Strong, which I mentioned in the last episode. Molly Galbraith, who is the founder of Girls Grown Strong, is terrific, and I've met her, and I got this, and I've been working through it. And there's a lot of information in that, so I'm going to try to distill 350 pages of well-researched documentation into an hour-ish podcast. So understandably, there will be some things left out, but I'm going to try to pick the things that I think are not necessarily most important, but cover as many of the bases as we can. There are also obviously specific situations, because every pregnancy is unique. Everybody deals with pregnancy differently. Everybody's body responds to pregnancy differently. Our pregnancies were different, or Megan's were, that I was, alongside her with. We had different concerns with both. Obviously, we had, one, and it was our first, and then we had the twins. We had a vaginal birth with Levi and a C-section with the twins. So there's different concerns there. We'll talk about that. Interesting piece of trivia. I heard this said by somebody, and I really liked it. It's a vaginal birth and not a vaginal delivery. Pizzas get delivered. Like, it's not just delivering, right? Like, you're birthing a human.
Yes.
And so I will do the best that I can with the language that I use. But also know that this comes from a place of a lot of obviously well-researched stuff, and there's stuff outside of this textbook that I've done, and I've talked to people. This comes from coaching a couple of dozen pregnant women throughout my coaching career, maybe more than that. I haven't kept tally. Obviously, my wife, and then currently I have, I think, 6 or 7 pregnant clients. So this is going to try to distill a lot of information down into the things that I think are ubiquitous, which I'm just going to use every opportunity to use that word.
I think you should.
And I learned that word. 7th grade vocabulary we did wordly wise. Ubiquitous is like the only word that I remember.
Wordly wise.
Yeah.
Oh, I hated wordly wise.
Yep. So ubiquitous was one of my wordly wise words, and I loved how it sounded so much that it stuck with me. And it's such a good word. It means very apparent, obvious, everywhere. If you have not heard that word before. And again, I only know it because I learned it in 7th grade, and it stuck with me. So I'm going to do the things that I think that are the most applicable to as many people as possible, the most practical. The obvious caveat for all of this is you should always be talking to your doctor about anything when it comes to pregnancy, because the number one focus of pregnancy is the health of mom and baby. Like, the purpose of pregnancy is to bring a healthy baby into the world and have mom be healthy on the other side of it. And so these are hopefully things that can help, but everybody has their own unique things that come up. And at some point, all of these principles might get thrown out the window. Like, for instance, you get somebody who's put on bed rest, right? Like, all of these things going to go out the window when these things happen. And so we want to be aware of that. So with those things said, we're going to dive in. So want to start with, I'm going to start with the training side of things. And we'll kind of go trimester by trimester here. Is how I have it in my head, but it may not work linearly that way. So I told Amy the reason why we're recording this on a Tuesday. We normally record on Friday, but the reason we're recording this on a Tuesday is I'm going to put out a pregnancy guide next week, which is going to kind of do the high points from these episodes. And it's helpful for me to kind of say the words before I then go and try to type it down and be like, okay, what were the things that I said that I felt like were the important points, and what's cohesive, and put it together. And the reason why I'm putting it out on Monday is because, and these episodes will come out on Monday because it'll be middle of March. And it's a month after Valentine's Day.
I was like, that's so funny.
This was me. I was like, so if you had a really good time on Valentine's Day and are getting some fun news,
woohoo!
how are you feeling? How So that's it. That's the place where I want to start. Okay, which is you find out that you're pregnant. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of emotions that come with finding out that you're pregnant. Mm-hmm. And we have experienced a lot of different ones. So with Levi, our oldest, found out, and it's excitement and it's terror and it's like holy cow and all of these things. With our miscarriage that we had, which again I'm because I'm sensitive to. I have a lot of friends who've dealt with this. I know a lot of people who've dealt with miscarriages and further along than we were. So like we didn't have a full pregnancy in that we never had a heartbeat. However, the emotions of the experience are somewhat similar. They're just abbreviated. So if you have or are dealing with that, I feel for you, because it's just brutal. And so for us with that one, it was a surprise pregnancy. I thought Megan was playing a joke on me because she likes to play practical jokes on me. So she came in and she was like, "Here's a positive pregnancy test," and I was like, "You just pulled out the one that you did with Levi, like." You know what I mean? Like she just was like, and I was like, this isn't a funny joke if you're playing a joke. Like, don't joke around with pregnancy with me. Like this has to be like, this is a no joking zone. She's like, I'm not joking. And we have a code word for each other. That's like, I'm not playing games, and we'll say honest. Like, and if somebody says honest, it's like,
no one could crack that code.
I understand. It's not a code like, secret, but it's just like between us, it's like if I say honest, I cannot tell a lie. And so if I hesitate, right, like that I'm like, if I don't right away say it, and she's like, no, honest. And I was like, and so Levi was.
He must have been real little.
8 months old or something like that. Yeah. This was like December. He was born in April. This was like December or something like November. It was real quick. Yeah. I think it was November. He was like 7 months old. And so it was like, what? And it's like, holy cow, like this wasn't what we had in mind. And like, oh, this is really soon. And I don't know about this. And where are we going to put them all, put the kids but then we started to get excited about the idea. It's like, okay, they're going to be close in age and, we'll just kind of get it all done at once and they'll be really close friends and you know what I mean? Whatever. Mm-hmm. And then, the come down from that. And then we had the twins, and I'm sharing all of this for a specific purpose. When we found out we were pregnant again, so it was like she got... I don't remember if it was November or December, but it was basically like found out that we were pregnant, go in, because she had some like symptoms that would suggest a miscarriage. And we're like, okay, this is strange. So she went in, and this was also in 2020. So I wasn't able to go with her to the doctor's appointments, which was brutal. They go in, they do an ultrasound. They can't find the heartbeat. And they're like, okay, it just might be too early. Like, come back in a week and we'll do it again. So there's like a week where like, are we pregnant? Are we not pregnant? I don't know. Mm-hmm. A week later, we go in and there's no heartbeat. And they're like, okay, so this is like, there should be a heartbeat at this point. We should be able to find it. So that means that there's nothing really developed. And so she has to go through the procedure to get it removed. And it's really, that's a hard thing to deal with. And so you deal with that roller coaster of emotions. And then she has like one cycle basically. And then the next cycle would have been February. So that timing kind of works. It was November, December, February. She's, would have been like the first time. And we were like, we're not really like we kind of whatever. And, find out again, positive pregnancy test. But at this point we're a little bit trepidatious about it. Like, hey, are we, because we had this experience, and so it was like, we don't want to get too high, we don't want to like get too excited about it, whatever it is. We told people pretty early like we told my parents and Megan's parents and some friends pretty early with the first one. It's like, hey, I'm pregnant. Like, cool. And everybody's excited. And then you go back and you tell people, which is a really hard thing to do.
I can't
pro,
imagine.
Pro tip, tell the people that you would want to know if you had a miscarriage.
Yep.
Like, that's the people that you tell before 12 weeks. The people that you would want to walk through that with you. As morbid as that is to say, and it's just the reality.
Because you need your support system.
You need the people to know and be able to love you in that moment. And also don't make comments. Like we talked about this. Don't make comments about other people's things. Like, hey, when are you guys, whatever, because you don't know what people are going through. Like we had somebody 3 days after Megan's procedure, like kind of lightheartedly joking, be like, when are you guys going to have another one? You know what I mean? Like you never know what people are going through. So just don't go there. People could be struggling with infertility, which is also just heartbreaking. And so there was trepidation, there was fear, there was hesitation, there was like, all right, do we get excited? Do we not? Like all the things that we felt before about like, okay, pregnancy and all that, like all of that's there, like excitement, but also like they are going to be close together still. So that is something we got to think about. But then also like, all right, can we get too high because we might have it, you know what I mean? And then back down. And then we went in and it was the same thing where she had the same symptoms. She goes in, there's 2 empty sacs now and no heartbeats. And so then we had a week where we could have had 0, 2, or 1 baby for a week. We were just living in like limbo. It was such a weird place to be. And then we find out that we have twins. And then we find out we have twins and it's like,
oh damn.
that's a whole nother level of like, okay, what to feel about that. It was never on the board in my head that we were going to have 3 kids, and certainly
that wasn't on your vision board.
It was not on my vision board. There are people who say that they want twins, by the way. There are people who, like, when they find out we have twins, they're like, oh, I would love twins. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not saying that I love my twins, and there are a lot of cool things about having twins, but
of course
there's also challenges.
That don't have them.
Yeah.
It's almost like the romantic idea of having 2 kids growing up as built-in best friends. Like that part, awesome. But everything else, you have two infants.
Yeah.
Whoa, 2 potty trainings at the same time. Well, you have a boy and a girl, so it won't be at the same time, but
yeah. No, it's interesting. It really is. There are wonderful things and there are hard things, just like with every kid, and every circumstance. So I say all that because you find out that you're pregnant and the emotions they run the spectrum.
Emotions are high.
Yes. And so I always, even like, unless I know what's happening, like I knew for all of my clients that got pregnant, who told me that they were pregnant, that they were planning to try, because that was a conversation that we had in the context of coaching. And so I was able to be like, wow, congratulations. Like, how you doing? Like, how are you feeling? But for some people, find out they're pregnant, and congratulations might not be the right word for them in that moment. And so understanding for us, as we dive into this, that there are, like, this is one of the most ubiquitous things, again, there it is, in the country. 85% of women in the United States will have a baby at some point in their life. That number is higher around the world. Like, that's fairly low. But 85% of women will experience this. So it's very common, but that doesn't make it simple, normal, easy. Okay. It's as big a thing as happens. And the reality of your body is not the same on the other side of pregnancy. Like when you do this, when you're in pregnancy and you through the process of pregnancy that we're going to talk about, and postpartum and or birth and all of this, I just said it. All right. And birth, right? That process is, and I mean this not in an emotional, but like it is a physical trauma that your body goes through. It is a when we define trauma, it's a singular or a series of events that physically change your body, like have a large impact on your body. Like if you got into a car accident and your hip bones moved out significantly, right? We would call that a trauma, and that's what happens through childbirth. And pregnancy. So it is something that we need to recognize that this is not a small thing. And so the adjustments that we make need to be taken with that level of, I don't know if scrutiny is the right word, but like attention.
Seriousness. Yeah.
So 20 minutes in, I told you, I have no idea where we're going with this. First trimester. So couple of pregnancy myths when it comes to exercise. Okay. Don't do anything new that you haven't done before. That is a myth. And the flip side of that is you can do whatever you did before. That's also a myth. All right. That doesn't mean that those are wrong. However, the first one is actually just dead wrong. But we want to be aware of, like, in the context of what we talked about, this is a serious thing. So those are the two extremes of the spectrum, right? Like, don't do anything because you're pregnant, or you can do whatever you want to do because you are a strong woman, right? We don't want to be overly cautious and as a pregnant woman, treat our body like it's breakable, but we also don't want to treat it like it's indestructible. Okay. There's a spectrum there, and we want to live somewhere in the middle. So, if you are totally sedentary prior to getting pregnant, I would not go, the recommendation is not to go above a moderate level of intensity when it comes to your workout or, exercising, but you can and should. There are innumerable benefits to exercising throughout pregnancy, and we'll talk about that. But that's kind of the just general principle. There are innumerable benefits for both mom and baby exercising through pregnancy. And I'm going to not necessarily talk about this in terms of a body composition, right? This is a health of everybody thing, but body composition may come into play because I know that's a factor for people sprinkled in. But for the health of mom and baby, exercise, the general recommendation is 150 minutes a week. And so that might feel like a lot, right? That's 2.5 hours of exercise a week, but that could include intentional walking, right? Like, but doing moderate exercise, even if you were sedentary, is exceptionally valuable. Doing super duper high intensity exercise with specific types is maybe not the best idea during pregnancy. I'm not going to sit here and say you shouldn't do it, because there are plenty of examples of women who have done that throughout their pregnancy and been just fine. Like powerlifting women and things.
I was going to ask,
what I mean?
Can you
like
clarify?
Like lifting heavy weight, right? If they've been doing it, elite level athletes doing elite level athlete stuff throughout their pregnancy, it can be done. And the challenge with all of this, and this is just kind of the caveat, there's not a lot of research. And the reason why is there's a lot of ethical dilemmas behind doing a test on the impacts of high intensity exercise, right? Like, not to make light of it, but it's like, all right, we're going to do a test group with this group of women, and we're going to just work them out. And the question is like, well, what happens to the baby if you do that? Like, is a good baby going to be? I don't know. We're going to find out.
That's what we're trying here.
If I knew, I wouldn't be running the test. Like, that's not. There's a lot of ethical research issues with doing something like that. So
Yes.
there isn't a ton of research, but anecdotally, there are plenty of women who have gone
Mm-hmm.
through pregnancy and done all or most of what they did before and were great.
Mm-hmm.
It's also tough to tell, like, what would it have been otherwise. That's also tough to tell because, again, every
Right.
woman
You
and
don't know the
every pregnancy
variables.
is different, right? There's a lot of confounding variables there. However, there are some exercises or principles of exercise that are maybe ones to uh, be a little bit more hesitant of, and that's the really, really, really high intensity, short burst type exercises.
Okay.
Um, Not because of the exercise itself, like you're going to blow a gasket or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
but when we get our heart rate up past a certain point, call it 160, 170, 180, you know what I mean? The level that your heart rate would get to on a max lift or
Mm-hmm.
a really intense high, like true high intensity interval training. So when we talk about HIIT, most people don't know what HIIT is. They just think I'm doing a HIIT class. It's not a HIIT
Mm-hmm.
class. Like true high intensity interval training is like 90+% effort for a short period of time and then
Mm-hmm.
almost entire recovery. Right? You're not doing a HIIT class where you're going for 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off. That's an interval
Mm-hmm.
class. It's not a HIIT class.
Mm-hmm.
But doing something that's really, really high intensity to the point where you get your heart rate well above 160. The challenge with that is there is research on it's called the Valsalva maneuver, which is when you like grab your nose and blow and it pops your eardrums. That's the
Yep.
Valsalva maneuver. The idea of doing the Valsalva maneuver is you kind of do that a little bit when you're doing those things, right? Like if I was doing like a 300-pound deadlift, right, I'm probably going to brace, hold my breath, and then and you get a little bit of that
Mm-hmm.
effect or that entire effect where your ears pop because you're going so hard and
Mm-hmm.
you're not breathing at any sort of a normal pace for that period of time. There
Mm-hmm.
is research that can restrict blood flow to the placenta and to the to
Mm-hmm.
the to the baby, to the fetus. There we go. I couldn't find the word. To the fetus. So it's something like 90% of the measure of that is your VO2 max, right? It's just a measure of how much air you're breathing. That
Mm-hmm.
can restrict blood flow to the
Mm-hmm.
fetus, which again is not like, okay, you're going to like immediately, end up harming your baby, but it's not something that we want to play around with.
No, of
Um,
course not.
for most people, and again, the reason why is blood volume for women who are pregnant increases by about
Mm-hmm.
45% on average. You have a
Mm-hmm.
lot more blood in your system, and so think about this is why blood pressure is a concern or a common concern
Mm-hmm.
among pregnant women is because you're you're pumping a lot more blood,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have the same size heart
Mm-hmm.
pumping, an extra half of the blood in your body plus the blood
Yep.
that you already had, and so it's not a small deal. And so the blood pressure, right? Your heart might have to beat more and things like that, and you want that
Right.
blood to be going to the baby. So we want to um, be aware of those components, and so most people don't like the average person doesn't often touch that unless they are doing elite level athlete things. And so that is a little bit of the minority, but just be aware of 1 to 3 rep max lifts, probably not your best bet, or maxing out lifts in general,
Mm-hmm.
probably not your best bet. Leaving a couple of reps in the tank, which is generally good principle for strength training anyway. Again, if you want more thoughts on that, you should go listen to the episode part 2 on strength training, part 2 and 3 on the strength training series. I think it's like episodes 17 and 19 or something like that.
It's early, yeah.
Yeah. Um, about leaving some reps in reserve.
Yep.
you probably have, hey, I could probably do 1 or 2 more, but I'm going to leave it. Now, the difference between 1 or 2 more and 3 and 5 more is substantial. If you're leaving 3 to 5 in the tank, you probably are not necessarily doing quite as much as you could be doing. So that's where we don't want to like back off. But the idea on the flip side of it is like, don't do anything. Like the common thing is like, don't lift anything over 20 pounds. And it's gotten like, that's not as common anymore because I think people realize how ridiculous it is. Because
It's a bag
like
of flour.
that's I mean
It's
my
your other
toddler,
child.
yeah, my
Yeah.
toddler was more than that. It's groceries. It's like lift the
Yeah.
car seat up. Um, the idea that we're not going to do that is a little bit silly, and so we don't want to treat pregnant women's bodies as fragile and breakable because
I
they're
mean,
not.
some of these medical recommendations, and I use that term very lightly, were just kind of developed as a, well, we don't really know, so we're just going to say don't do that.
Yeah.
But we don't know because women are so fragile and like we
Yeah.
don't. Uh,
Yeah.
there's just
Well, so
babies.
again, the flip side of that is, so the idea is like trying to be more cautious, right? Doctors are going to tend to be more cautious, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the flip side of that is that we leave things on the table. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you go to the side of like, okay, I'm not going to lift any weights and I'm not going to do some of these things, I want to talk about the benefits of that, doing cardio and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the drawbacks of not doing that we've experienced is often we end up with increased gestational weight gain, right?
Mm-hmm.
We gain more weight, which has impacts on a lot of the factors of the health of the baby and the birth
Yes.
process. And then
Yeah.
also how you feel on the other side of it.
Afterward. Mm-hmm.
And so why muscle loss is such a popular thing during pregnancy is not necessarily because pregnancy does it to you, but because people tend to not do things that they need to do during pregnancy because
Mm-hmm.
of the fear of that. And so then you come back and women feel soft and not super strong during fourth trimester and beyond
Yeah.
because they haven't been doing a lot of these things during pregnancy. And so again, there are exceptions to every rule, but there are a lot of benefits to this. And so what the general recommendation is if you're training, right? If you were training before, you can do a lot of what you were doing before, but do it to what's called there's a scale called the rate of perceived exertion, RPE, which is just basically like on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard was that for you?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to live in like a 7, right? 7, 8 kind of on the top end, which just basically means, which is the inverse of that is reps in reserve. So if I'm at a 7 or an 8, I have 2 or 3 reps in reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, it's like, all right, that was hard, but not so hard that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we need to kind of, that's the benefit of doing that versus putting an absolute number on it is it encourages women to listen to their bodies, which is what we
Mm-hmm.
want to do during pregnancy. Okay, like the mother instinct is absolutely a real thing. Like if you feel like something is off, go to the doctor, get
Mm-hmm.
the non-stress test done. Like Megan got like 7 or 8 non-stress tests throughout both of her pregnancies. Like just go to the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
like make sure everything's all right. You'd rather
Yeah.
be you'd rather be too cautious than
Mm-hmm.
and don't let anybody who has done this a lot, right? So this is something where I think there are some phenomenal doctors, right? And there's some maybe not so great nurses and things like that. Don't let a nurse who sees a baby delivered every 2 days, right, say, oh, this is normal, and dismiss your feelings about it, right? Advocate for
Mm-hmm.
yourself because this is your first pregnancy and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay that you don't have all the answers and you don't know what's normal or not. Or this is your
Mm-hmm.
subsequent pregnancy, but every friggin' pregnancy is different. And so just
Mm-hmm.
because it happens some way the most of the time doesn't mean that it's not going to happen that way for you. So you have to advocate for yourself and know that that's kind of the reality.
Mm-hmm.
So listening to your body and so some days, right, it's not just like, okay, do 70%. Like if you were a lifter, let's say, and you normally would squat 50 pounds, doing 70% of that would be 35 pounds. It doesn't necessarily mean that, right? There might be some days where you're like, I'm exhausted today, and 20 pounds feels like a 7 out of 10. And there's some
Yeah.
days where 50 pounds might feel, and you just do a couple fewer reps, or you feel fine, and you're like, that's a 7 out of 10. So it is going to be very volatile, and you listen to your body as best you can.
I remember when I was pregnant, my ligaments seemed to get like looser.
Yes.
Where, I don't know, like when preparing for one of these types of either a lift or something, even walking sometimes would bother them. What do you recommend as a preparation for someone who is pregnant, who has some of these, you just feel stretchier and not in a good way, not in a good way
you
stretchier.
Will. So it's there are your ligaments around your pelvis, particularly as you get into, and so this is one of my notes, ligaments around pelvis, particularly as you get into trimester 2 and 3, are going to loosen up to prepare for birth and also to make room for the baby, right? So they have to loosen up.
Yeah.
And so the things that we do with this is, again, you want to listen to your body, but also it's exercise selection. So this is where having a coach who knows what the heck they're talking about can be helpful. There are certain exercises and things like that become a little bit more challenging. So, and this is, again, it changes person to person. So for instance, Allie, who comes to our class, right, she was 40 weeks pregnant doing split squats and she was just fine, right? But for most, I would say a larger portion of women, doing a split stance lunge position can be harder because of the balance component. Doing something on one leg could be harder because of the balance position, because the ligaments around your joints are a little bit looser, and so you don't have quite the same stability. So doing stuff on 2 feet can be a little bit more helpful in that way. So it's a prep, and that's why walking kind of feels that way, because walking is a one leg exercise, right? Think about the position that you're in. It's a one leg exercise. And so some of the stability there. So there's two sides of that. One of them is you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're like, all right, this is going to be a problem, right? But the flip side of it is we don't want to totally avoid it, because the way that we strengthen something is to steer into it to some degree. As long as we're not experiencing discomfort in the joints, that would mean like pain, shooting, right? Or instability, in that you're afraid that you're going to fall, which is a problem, because there's
that's a
much higher increase, a risk of falling when you're pregnant, which is not is something that we're going to actively try to avoid, which is why certain exercises are maybe not the best choices. For instance, doing like, CrossFit is fine. All right. But I'm going to poop on a lot of CrossFit stuff. If you like CrossFit, good on you.
Well, if you like CrossFit, all your friends already know that, because it's the first thing you say to them.
That's very accurate.
True.
So
I have a lot of friends at CrossFit, and they're wonderful and super fit, but
100%. Yeah. There's the risk reward thing with CrossFit is where the challenge is, and particularly for pregnancy. Again, if you've been doing CrossFit beforehand and you feel good about your coach being able to do this, but most exercises that are common to CrossFit are not the best choices when it comes to pregnancy, because of the risk of impact in particular, which would be box jumps, barbell Olympic lifts, like cleans, snatches, and stuff like that. Because what are you going to do? Oh, I might like literally hit my belly as I get into trimester 2 and 3 on the way up. That doesn't mean that all barbell exercises are bad, or that Olympic lifts are, you could do a dumbbell snatch or something like that. But what is commonly used in CrossFit boxes are exercises generally, burpees, box jumps for time,
For
or
speed,
for
right?
reps, and then barbell Olympic lifts. All of those are generally not my favorite exercises to do in that way anyway, because of the risk of injury, but
Right.
particularly for women who are pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
um, because of the risk of impact to the baby,
Mm-hmm.
which is, again, not something we want to take lightly. Um, and there are ways to kind of work around that. So doing some exercises that can strengthen, uh, or put you into a position where you don't feel super strong, but can get stronger. That's just generally good lifting points, and as well. But the other benefit of doing, if you can do those without pain and without fearing that you're going to fall over, and there's variations on them where you can add some stability. You do a supported split squat, you
Mm-hmm.
do it with a TRX strap, something like that. The benefit of doing those is that you can decrease the external load to keep the same level of challenge. Meaning, I can do a split squat with, say, a 20-pound dumbbell, and that's going to be the same level of difficulty as a goblet squat with a 50-pound dumbbell or a 25-pound dumbbell or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
so I don't have to hold as much weight, which, again,
Mm-hmm.
the concern or the common thing that ends up happening is that we oftentimes, and this is where we'll kind of get into with the ligaments and stuff like that, we oftentimes end up with um, pelvic girdle pain and low back pain.
Mm-hmm.
Women do, um,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as you get further and further along in the process, because your center of mass changes, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
normally you're vertical, and then you're 8 months pregnant, you have a 15-pound belly in front of you. You see the like jokes of like men going in and they get a medicine ball like duct taped to their belly, and they do their
Yeah.
workout with a medicine ball duct taped to their belly, and they're like, that was friggin' hard, because your
Yeah.
center of mass is off in it, low back and stuff like that. And so you have additional center of mass challenges. You have additional external load that you're already dealing with. And so commanding your own body weight is enough of a challenge, not enough of a challenge, but it is a challenge in and of itself, more so than when you are not
Yep.
pregnant. And so if we can find some exercises that don't require a ton of external load, and you can be a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more focused on commanding your body weight with the center of mass changing, that can be super beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, I like, for pregnant women, provided that we don't end up with pain, to try to do unilateral, meaning one-sided exercises
Mm-hmm.
for as long as possible, for that reason. Because it's going to, when you go on one leg, you recruit a lot of the supporting muscles.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the glute medius a lot, and like your glute medius is your Jane Fonda muscle on the side of your butt, your side butt, like where your butt dimple is, right there on the side. That muscle is not super big, but it does a lot in terms of stability. It's
Mm-hmm.
really activated when you're on one leg, and then it can also help with the fact that your ligaments are moving, but the muscles can kind of compensate a little bit for that. So, um, yeah, remember when I said we were going to go in order? That didn't happen. But those are, I think, just good general principles. So what we're going to do, I'm going to finish exercise, and then we'll go to nutrition, and then we'll like kind of circle back
Okay.
to, I think that we've just kind of been on the exercise side of things. So, um, strength training, particularly there, your ligaments will do this. There is the
Mm-hmm.
round ligament as well, which is the
The
ligament
belly
that,
ones. Yeah.
the belly ligament. All right. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, that is one that, by thinking about what where does that come from? Why do you have round ligament pain,
Mm-hmm.
which is very common for women? It's
It's
because
incredibly common.
that ligament is that's really kind of the only thing holding your belly up,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so you get uh, pelvic girdle pain, you get low back pain, and then you have this round ligament pain. And it's usually as you get further and further along in your pregnancy, it's due to the fact that, again, your center of mass, you are putting a bowling ball out in front of the rest of you and it's pulling you forward. And so there is your pelvis likes to be like where a neutral pelvis is would be like the front is like slightly below the back, but it's basically level. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But as we go forward, right, with more weight on the front, it's going to tilt your pelvis into what's called anterior pelvic tilt. So anterior being the front, posterior being the back. So there's anterior pelvic, posterior pelvic tilt. You go into anterior pelvic tilt. And we experience this just with sitting a lot, right? When we
Mm-hmm.
have anterior pelvic tilt, like if you look in the mirror right now, if you turn to the side and look in the mirror and you look at the line of your pants, if
Mm-hmm.
your pants are around your waist, right? I know women's pants are oftentimes higher right now. Like it's
Especially
very
after
popular.
pregnancy.
Yeah, it's just up at like mid belly
Up.
button.
If you can see my
Higher
belly
than
button,
belly,
they are not high enough.
above the belly button. I'm sorry, like mid between the belly button and the. Sorry, I know, but so you look at like if it was at
The
your
turtleneck.
waist, and then you looked at where the line of your pants is, the waistline of your pants. If the
Mm-hmm.
front of the pants is below like the back of the pants, then you're into
Okay.
anterior pelvic tilt. And so if you were to do that right now and you were looking at it and then you were to just squeeze your butt a little bit, you would find that you tilt back to closer
Yeah.
to level. And the reason why we get that from sitting is, and this is a little bit of an aside, but it brings back to what we're talking about. We get that from sitting because when we're in a sitting position, the front of our legs rest short,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that my hip flexors, the muscles in the front of my legs are currently like in a contracted position. They're shorter, and the muscles in the back are stretched, meaning that there's a bigger distance from like the bottom of my butt to my hips versus when I stand up, right? When I stand up, the
Mm-hmm.
front of my leg gets further from my hip and the back of my leg get closer to my hip. And so how do we combat anterior pelvic tilt? Again, it's not something that like it's been demonized a little bit as like a really big problem, but a lot of back pain issues can be attributed to some version of anterior pelvic tilt because our back takes on the load of more
Mm-hmm.
of the load of the front of our body than
Mm-hmm.
our glutes do, right? So like if I'm in anterior pelvic tilt, my low back has to kind of hold up more of my body than if I was neutral, right? That's just a physics thing. Like if you lean forward a little bit, all of a sudden you feel the back muscles start to wake up a little bit because more of gravity is acting down on you. So when there's a natural thing, pregnant belly pulling me
Mm-hmm.
forward into
Mm-hmm.
anterior pelvic tilt, my low back is obviously going to take on more of the load. This is where
Mm-hmm.
sciatica comes into play for a lot of women
Mm-hmm.
during pregnancy, right? A lot of women have sciatic pain. And so
Mm-hmm.
some things that we can do are we want to combat that and try to put our pelvis as in, and you're going to naturally go there, but try to strengthen some of the back muscles and the glute muscles to help support the belly so that
Mm-hmm.
less of the belly is being pulled on by gravity, so that the round ligament, which is basically just goes along the bottom of your belly, less of that is taking on less of the weight of your belly. So the way
Mm-hmm.
that we do that are through doing glute medius strengthening exercises or any glute strengthening exercises. So glute medius strengthening exercises are going to be anything that goes out to the side. Any of your Jane Fonda exercises. If you're
Mm-hmm.
young to know who Jane Fonda is, Google it. Google Jane Fonda exercises. It'll be a YouTube video that comes up, but it's just side lying leg raises, mini band lateral walks, anything that's feeling a burning there. And you could do
Mm-hmm.
those friggin' every day, all day till the cows come home. You're not going to overtrain them for the most part. Glute bridges, regular glute bridges are going to be really good for strengthening your glutes, as well as, any sort of kickbacks or, and then also spinal erector exercises, which are the muscles that go along your spine as you can trying to work those as best you can, which is oftentimes just comes from doing deadlifting type exercises where your back is forced to hold your body weight up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is usually a way to do it. That's usually the best one that doesn't require your belly being on the floor, which
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes is basically past first trimester or even before that is like not an option for
Mm-hmm.
women to do like Supermans or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So strengthening those muscles again. So this comes back to the ligament stuff in my hips are loose, right? The round ligament pain. As much as we get ligament pain oftentimes when the ligaments are supporting our body where our muscles are not,
Mm-hmm.
right? Ligaments are meant to hold the bone, right? It's ligaments hold bone to bone. That's what ligaments do. And ideally, our muscles would kind of help hold our bone in place. So the way
Mm-hmm.
that we can combat ligament pain is by strengthening our muscles as best we can, particularly the ones that are taking on the load or where the ligaments are taking on the load that the muscles ought to be. So
Mm-hmm.
glute strengthening exercises. It's become popularly referred to as deep core is another one, but it's that's like become a very popular thing on the internet. It's kind of Pilates esque,
Mm-hmm.
but the idea of not doing core, it basically it just means don't do core exercises that force your core to move, right? So crunches, Russian twists, things like that are usually not going to be great during pregnancy anyway, not super comfortable.
Yeah.
But they're also just not great core exercises in general for a lot of people. And so focusing more on core exercises that resist movement rather
Mm-hmm.
than to create it. So, um, planks are usually okay for a little bit until the point where the weight of the belly starts to weigh you down in the front and that starts to become
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Then you can elevate your hands as an option.
Mm-hmm.
Leg lifts are usually okay for a period of time. And remind me to make sure I talk about lying on your back here, but leg lifts are usually okay for a little bit. Dead bugs, that kind of stuff is usually all right. Um, Side planks and things like that. Again, at a certain point, those start to become uncomfortable with the
Mm-hmm.
belly kind of going
It's
down at that
pulling you
angle,
down. Yeah.
pulling you down. Standing stuff with like a Palloff press or something like that. Again,
Those
if
are
I,
great. Mm-hmm.
those are great. And they're within pregnancy, people can oftentimes be like, oh, these are like, it's usually we need to back off a little bit from what we think that we want to do with those.
Mm-hmm.
But great exercise because it will kind of cross core that way and resist some movement there. Carries are a really good one as well for pregnant women for core exercises. Farmer's carries, suitcase carries, racked
Mm-hmm.
carries. Uh, Again, Google any of those if you don't know what they are. But those are really good ones because you're standing, you're moving,
Mm-hmm.
your core has to be engaged, and they're also super applicable to your life, particularly
What you're
if
about
you
to do.
already have, you
Yeah.
will do, or if you already have kids,
Yep.
right? You're like, I got to carry one kid in this arm, and so all those carry motions are really helpful
Mm-hmm.
as well. Cycling in with that core stuff is the diastasis recti, all right, which is the
Mm-hmm.
process by which almost it's almost universal that every woman experiences some level of this because you have to during pregnancy because the abdomen needs to split. This is that process
Mm-hmm.
through which the abdomen splits down the middle a little bit to make room for the baby,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you're again coming back to like this is very common but not normal. Like your organs get pushed around, your hips
Mm-hmm.
move, your
Yeah, everything gets shoved out of
muscles
the way.
get torn, all these kinds of things. Whether or not it comes, it kind of naturally heals itself or
Mm-hmm.
women end up needing that surgery. Again, that I might dig into that a little bit more on the pelvic floor episode because I think
Mm-hmm.
those are two a little bit more things where we start to talk about surgeries and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Touch on that a little bit more there, but the way that we can help that is through continuing to train our core during pregnancy,
Mm-hmm.
and also choosing exercises that don't put undue pressure on you there, which are typically exercises with your belly hanging down below you as the belly gets
Mm-hmm.
bigger. So doing things like a push up, like a regular push up, one, at some point the belly gets in the way.
Yeah. Like you can't lay down.
But to just things like that where it's hanging pretty low, inclining your hands again. This is where, like, if we understand the force vector of gravity, and not trying to be too sciencey here, but like gravity pulls straight down.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more we can make our belly sort of closer and closer to vertical, the less it's going to push. Like if I was horizontal to the ground in a push-up position, then all of the weight of gravity is going straight down through the baby and then through the middle of my abdomen, which is where you would
Mm-hmm.
see kind of almost this crowning sort of thing where you would see
Mm-hmm.
the belly kind of come to a point, and at a
Mm-hmm.
certain point that becomes dangerous as well. And so if I can incline my hands or I become a little bit more angled, then less of the gravity is putting straight down there. And again, the more vertical I get, the less pressure I put on the round ligament to hold the extent of my belly.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is again by contracting your core and not just being in that position, but like you got to squeeze hard, and you will
Mm-hmm.
not, you're not gonna flex your abs into early labor. Um,
Mm-hmm. It's
it,
not your
it's
abs that do that.
it's not the abs doing that. It's a whole
Right.
different muscle system. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's that piece of it. I know
Mm-hmm.
that was a little bit of a
No,
wow.
I think it's interesting, and I hope that some of the male listeners have kind of hung on or are listening just to learn, because
Mm-hmm.
it's incredible the things that even as a woman I didn't know were going to happen because it's not talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I could see the, like on the top of my abs,
Mm-hmm.
when I had a triangle where it was like soft tissue was coming
Yep.
through, and I was panicked about it. And my
Yep.
doctor's like, "Oh no, that's just your abs have
Moved.
separated to,
Yep.
to allow for growth." And I'm like, "But what's that coming through?" And she's like, "That's just your organs. Like
Yeah.
they had to move too." I'm like, "Oh
Yeah.
my god, they don't prepare you for this."
No. No, it's it's not, yeah. It's very
They keep a
lightly
lot of
talked
things
about.
secret. They keep a lot
Yes.
secret so that we do procreate.
Yes.
Because I think if they let everybody know it was really going to happen, we'd
Yeah.
be like, "I'm all set. I'm good."
Yeah. So a couple more quick notes, and then we'll kind of do some bigger concepts here as we walk through this. So,
Okay, ready.
and then we'll dive into nutrition. So, lying on your back, right? So that's
Yeah,
common. Like, hey, this is maybe not the bit. That's why they say, hey, don't
yeah,
sleep on your back and things like that.
yeah.
But those are for extended periods of time.
Like
So a lot of
overnight.
overnight, right? But the
Yeah.
idea that like I can't lie on my back and do a set of bench press or something like that
Mm-hmm.
for a minute, you're there's not enough time there
Mm-hmm.
to 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 make that be an issue. But again,
Mm-hmm.
this is a listen to your body sort of situation. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are uncomfortable in that position, particularly to the point where it's affecting your form and technique with the exercise at hand,
Mm-hmm.
there is no magic exercise that needs to be done. Let me repeat that. There is no magic exercise that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a coach or a trainer or an instructor that is not able to adapt things for you, if you say to them, this is uncomfortable for me, you need to find a
Mm-hmm.
new one.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not saying it's me. I'm saying you need to find a new one. And it's not a question. That would be like having a doctor who is your OBGYN who doesn't know how to use an ultrasound.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like this is not a small deal because the consequences are with the increased responsibility here. Um, it's absolutely necessary. And honestly, if you're in a position where you don't know who around you in your area or whoever can help you with this, send me a message on Instagram and I will find you. If you want somebody local, I will find you somebody local to you that like I have a decent sized network of coaches around the world that if I don't know one of them knows somebody in your
Mm-hmm.
area who is qualified to help you or can help you online
Mm-hmm.
as I do. Um, but please don't stay in a position where they don't know what they're talking about. Um, All right.
All right. Nutrition.
One more quick like overview in terms of the trimesters, and this will kind of lead into nutrition. So, the chances that we get through postpartum today are, well, we'll see. We're already at an hour.
Oh, yeah.
We're cruising. So, um, first trimester, the biggest kind of gauge when it comes to, or the biggest obstacle when it comes to your activity is going to be fatigue and nausea and those types of things, right? So this is going to be a listen to your body sort of scenario. However, this is a big thing that I'm talking about with a lot of my clients right now, which is consistency during that time. And I think we talked about this in the last episode, did we?
A little bit. Or at least
Consistency
if you did
with
a
the
post on it.
activity, not necessarily the outcome. Consistency with the process, not necessarily the outcome. Meaning, like I have a client who she is trying to like walk every day, sort of thing. Like that's her window, and she puts the kids down. She's got a walking pad. She goes into. I'm like, your threshold for is it a successful day is if you walk on that walking pad for 1 minute. That is the threshold. If you walk for 1 minute, you did the thing. Some days that's going to be all you got because of fatigue, because of nausea, because of whatever. Some days you're going to feel fine. You might do 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I don't care. But like we have to lower the barrier to entry when it comes to the process during that time, because there will be those exterior factors where you cannot get yourself up to do it. But being consistent with the process is going to make it easier for you come trimester 2, where oftentimes some of that nausea has dissipated. Or again, this is different for person to person. Megan had kind of, so morning sickness is usually all day sickness. Like
that morning
for
it's a
most
lie.
people, it's all day sickness. It might be worse in the morning. And first trimester, sometimes it extends beyond that. But usually fatigue has settled a little bit in trimester 2. And so you're starting to feel like, hey, I can do some more things. And then we dive into, like, you're able to maybe do a little bit more of your activity. But again, that becomes easier if we haven't taken 2 or 3 months to just punt it until I feel better.
Right.
It's just like, hey, let's just get back to, like, I just ratchet up what I've already been doing in that scenario. But again, it's a continue to listen to your body. But now we get into some of we have to choose exercises differently. First trimester, you could basically do whatever you want to do and you're going to be just fine. Particularly if you've already been doing something. If you haven't been doing something, you can still get the newbie gains, by the way, which is a common thing of, like, you can put on some muscle if you haven't already, or even continue to put on muscle if you have been putting on muscle during pregnancy. Like, you are not exempt from the ability to put on muscle if you are still doing the things that you would do to put on muscle. And we'll get into that here in a second with nutrition. Third trimester is like kind of the back half of second trimester and into third trimester is where fatigue will start to set in, but in a little bit of a different way. You're just tired you're probably not sleeping as great, and you're carrying around an extra 15, 20, 25 pounds in front of you every day, all day. So we'll be a little bit hard, choosier with our exercise selection in that situation. And again, it's just like continue to move as best you can, because the situations where people end up with some increased gestational weight gain, gestational, those types of things are where, to the point where it becomes dangerous or harder to give birth and all of these things. That's oftentimes where we just punt on all activity. So the number one thing, as the number one piece of activity in the hierarchy of fat loss and everything like that, even above strength training and cardio, is walking. For pregnant women, I would multiply it times 2. Like, if you do, like, I would love for you to strength train throughout your pregnancy, but you gotta walk. Unless you are put on bed rest, you gotta walk. As best you can, because for swelling, for joint, and like you're going to work your muscles to hold your body upright to walk. So especially with the extra weight, it's like going on a walk with a weighted vest. There's a lot of benefits to doing it. So would highly encourage that throughout all of them. That's exercise. Anything, any other questions that you can think of? Make sure that I hit all my notes here.
No, we hit all my questions. I
I mean,
appreciate
we
it.
did an hour, so we probably should have hit it. Or 40 minutes. We started exercise 20 minutes in. All right, so I think we'll actually be able to do nutrition here relatively quickly.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll get to postpartum, but I think we'll be able to do nutrition.
I think we could push that to part 2.
Yeah, probably. Amy put a blanket on, like I'm putting her to sleep.
The heat turned off in my office, so it's like 40 degrees in here. I'm so cold.
So, nutrition. I'm going to go trimester by trimester here. At least in my head, I am. So, the biggest challenge in trimester 1 is going to be the nausea and the food aversion. All right. So you're going to be like, hey, vomiting and food aversion. It's like, that doesn't look good to me. Or I think it looks good and it doesn't look good. Right. So the general principles for nutrition still hold. Right. So all of the things that we've talked about with nutrition, like protein, fiber, mostly whole foods, et cetera, all of those are still true in pregnancy, made even more apparent, I think, in pregnancy, to eat more whole, less processed foods, particularly being intentional when it comes to sugar because of the effect of on gestational diabetes, processed sugar in particular, right? Fruits are generally, you're not going to generally get gestational diabetes because you ate too much fruit. And again,
Probably
that's
not.
not you're going to be genetically predisposed to that, right? So some of
Right.
that stuff is outside of your control, but we can combat that the best we can by doing the activity, keeping our weight gain to a necessary amount versus additional, right? And being aware of our sugar intake, particularly from processed simple sugars. The idea of food aversion and nausea and the strategies for this are, one, same concept as with activity, particularly in first trimester, which is do the process and then have a backup plan. So I do this with my kids. This is my strategy, my best strategy when it comes to food for my kids. Right? I put the plate in front of you. That's a quality meal, or at
Yep.
least the meal that I planned for you to make. The best option that I can make. If you don't want that, I have 2 backup options for you, both of which are easy, both of which are decent but not the best. Right? So it's either going to be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or it's going to be Greek yogurt in a bowl. Like that, those are your 2 choices if you don't want what I made for you. And so the idea is we still want to keep the practice of preparing some ingredients. We still want to keep the practice of putting a decent plate out, right? We want to still keep the practice of having protein and fruits and vegetables and high quality, all of these things. But if you look at it and you're like, I can't get myself to eat that right now, what are some
What's your
safe
backup?
foods that are like, have 2 or 3 that don't take a lot of prep time, that are safe, and recognize that they're not going to be a 10 out of 10 on the
Right.
quality scale, but we're also not going to go from, all right, I'm not going to have my, chicken and rice pilaf and roasted broccoli. That doesn't sound good to me. So I'm going to have, a popsicle and some Ritz crackers. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want to have it be that big of a swing. We want to, like, what can I do? That's what we want to focus on. What can I do? And have that there. The nausea thing and the vomiting thing, again, that's a thing that you got to be aware of. Be aware of the things that you're going to do it, and also recognize, like, listen, salmon has been forever ruined for my wife because of pregnancy. Like, Megan just doesn't like salmon anymore, and I love salmon, which is a bummer for me. But she smelled it during her first trimester.
I've never liked it though.
It's so good. But she smelled it during her pregnancy with the twins, and she was just like, that was gross. Like, I just can't do it. And so now she still doesn't do it. So understand that, again, it's very different in that way. Very, very different. So be aware of that. As we get a little bit further along into trimester 2 and 3, cravings are a real thing. All right.
They
So
are
there's a couple
indeed.
things that we want to be aware of. First of all, they're normal. Second of all, just because you crave something doesn't mean you have to eat it. All right, I'm going to say that. And now I can say that right now. I say it on behalf of, because I also, your husband is not going to say no to you. Okay? Like,
That's true.
he's just
They
not
know
going
better.
to do it. Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's your decision
Mm-hmm.
what you decide to act on. And so this
Mm-hmm.
is where we want to be uh, conscientious of those choices, but also recognizing if you are somebody who has very intense cravings, and they're usually something sweet, like everybody jokes about like the pickles and whatever, but usually it's something sweet,
Mm-hmm.
um, or very salty.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that you're going to have more cravings, that's where I would probably just say, all right, I'm not doing anything that's quote unquote treat food outside of craving time.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, like I'm banking all those for the times when I'm like, I
Mm-hmm.
gotta have it, right?
Yep.
That would be a recommendation, but also keep the same principles in mind that you would in any other circumstance, which is one, you are not a slave to your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you want something doesn't mean it has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also that we want to recognize what am I trying to do right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is uh, healthy baby. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so the more of those things that we steer into, the more likely I am to end up with excess gestational weight gain and flirt with gestational diabetes and all of
Mm-hmm.
the other medical issues that can come from that. Again, not trying to fear monger or anything like that, but we also want to recognize that it does make things harder
Mm-hmm.
for your pregnancy, your birth, to be able to even just do the activity thing, right? If I am
Mm-hmm.
just, listen, I'm having, a bunch of treats and I put on an additional 10 or 15 pounds just from, all right, it's my cravings and this is what I want. And I give myself permission to do it, which is fine. But I put on an extra 10 or 15 pounds of weight that I probably didn't need to. That's extra weight that I have to carry around,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it harder to do the activity. It makes it, I'm more likely to swell up. I'm going to be less likely to do activity. And then I'm also
Mm-hmm.
going to have that weight that I have to deal with on the other side of
At the
pregnancy,
end. Mm-hmm.
which is all, and it makes birth harder. And so
Mm-hmm.
there are things where we want to recognize that, listen, it's going to happen, but the idea that we don't want to just punt on good sense
Mm-hmm.
with the I don't love the word excuse, but my permission slip being like, I'm pregnant. It's like the
Yeah.
what's the Parks and Rec thing, which is like, no, don't worry, I have a permit that
This just
runs.
says I can do whatever I
Yeah, I
want.
do what I want, right? Like the permit is I'm pregnant, I can do what I want, right?
Yeah.
We need to ditch that mentality,
Yep.
right? You're pregnant and you can't do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
You pregnant and what you need to do is everything you can to keep yourself and your baby healthy. And I know somebody listening to this who's pregnant knows this. I don't need to remind you of it
Mm-hmm.
because I think that women, more than anybody, more than I can, understand the weight of what it is that they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
However, we can get those two things confused
Mm-hmm.
where I am doing what's best for the baby by keeping myself, you know what I mean? And that doesn't mean don't ever eat these things. I'm just telling you,
Mm-hmm.
we want to be aware of that, and we can't just
Mm-hmm.
say yes to everything
Mm-hmm.
because there is consequences, not just, oh, I put on some extra weight during my pregnancy and I have to
Mm-hmm.
take it off on the other side. There are complications during pregnancy for you and the baby to go overboard with this. But again,
Mm-hmm.
if I was, if we talk about the 80-20 rule for nutrition, 80% whole, less processed foods, 20% whatever you'd like, right? Maybe you extend that to 70-30. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? But understand that 30%, if you're a high cravings person, those are probably going to all be cravings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus plan things, or plan them if you can, right? And just be like, I'm going to plan my times. I'm going to pick my spots. And that depends on the person.
Yeah, mine changed a lot. My
Yeah.
cravings changed a lot. So if I had stocked up, then it would have had
Mm.
a lot of pickled ginger in the house for no reason.
So nasty.
I agree with you, but at the time, it was all I wanted.
So, couple more quick things when it comes to nutrition, and I think we will sign, seal, deliver this here, and then we'll have another episode that'll be postpartum, and in that we will talk about pelvic floor, pelvic health, and diastasis recti a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And also the things I think that will make a lot of sense because those are
Mm-hmm.
all things that you tend to experience more on the heels of postpartum. And again, once you're postpartum, you are always postpartum.
Correct.
In the sense that your body will not be the same. That doesn't mean that you're defined by it, but your body will have gone through something quite significant. So, two last things when it comes to nutrition. So now we get into trimester 3, where one of the primary challenges in trimester 3 is there's a baby in the way
Mm-hmm.
of your room, right? You don't have as much room to your stomach can't expand as much to eat as much food, and so you may need to shift the way in which you eat
Mm-hmm.
because you may find that you get full a lot faster
Mm-hmm.
as you get into trimester 3, and so doing smaller meals, snacks, things like that are going to be helpful oftentimes when you get into that position. Um, but that's where like my wife had a harder time. She was still throwing up in trimester 3, and it was usually because she liked she generally eats like 2 or 3 bigger meals a day. That's just how she normally eats. And so she would eat like a normal meal and she would like just wouldn't have room for all of it. And so then she would get sick because she's like, I didn't have room for all that basically.
Mm-hmm.
So be aware of that. Now, last thing that I want to get to is some specifics. The idea of eating for 2, like, hey, I got to eat more to support the baby, that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So first thing, before I go there, again, if there was ever a time to focus on your protein intake,
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy is again one of them because of all the things we talked about in maintaining your muscle mass, as
Mm-hmm.
well as benefits for the baby and
Mm-hmm.
all the things that are involved with growing a healthy fetus. High protein, 100%. So again, the general frame is like zero point 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of it's tough to say goal body weight when you're pregnant because that's a tough thing, but like around where you think you would like to be, that's usually a
Mm-hmm.
place to be. But if you can go all the way up to 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of prenatal body weight, that would be outstanding. So like if you
Mm-hmm.
were 140 before you got pregnant, um, that's where I would kind of go with. I am not going to talk about what is an appropriate weight gain for pregnancy. I'm just not going to do it because
Mm-hmm.
everybody is different. That you can't do percentages, you can't do whatever. You know, no, it depends on the baby, it depends on your body, whatever it is. But there is a necessary weight gain because
Mm-hmm.
there's a human and all of the support
Everything else.
mechanisms
Yeah.
to house and grow the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is usually, you know, 12 to 22 pounds, depending on the
Mm-hmm.
baby, right? So that's a fairly large range as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's usually going to be some additional weight gain along with that 15 to 22 pounds. There's going to be an additional weight gain along with that. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but again, we want to be aware of that. So sufficient protein, 100% holding on to the muscle that you have as best you can. Now, in terms of extra calories uh, to support the baby, first trimester, you do not need any additional calories.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that I still actually have, and again, this is not the goal. We talked about this last time. This is not the goal, but I still have some clients who had a goal of fat loss before they got pregnant, who are
Mm-hmm.
in first trimester and are currently losing a little bit of weight.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the goal. It's not something, and they had a little bit more that was to play around with, but that can still happen, even if the weight on the scale doesn't move. They're losing inches, right? So you can
Mm-hmm.
still lose fat during that period of time because you don't need additional calories usually during that first trimester. As we
Mm-hmm.
get into second trimester, the average is about 340 extra calories per day for a baby. As you get into third trimester, it ups to about 450 or so. And then
Mm-hmm.
in fourth trimester with breastfeeding, it's about
Mm-hmm.
500.
Yep.
If you are breastfeeding. If you're not breastfeeding, you can go back to your normal calories. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more on the other side. So you could hypothetically, right? Let's take some simple numbers here. Let's just say that I was in a fat loss phase prior to getting pregnant, or a maintenance phase, whatever it is. Let's say that my target calorie, but let's do the fat loss phase for a second. And then we'll go into maintenance calories. If I was in a fat loss phase prior to pregnancy and my target calories were 1,500 a day, okay, I could maintain those same calories and then just do the additions throughout. So first trimester, I could still eat 1,500 calories. Second trimester, I could eat 1,500 plus 340, so 1,840. Third trimester, I could eat 1,950. And I would hypothetically still be in a calorie deficit
Mm-hmm.
if I kept my same activity level throughout that whole time. Again, that is not the goal, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that you ought to do that.
Mm-hmm.
However, it can be thought of that way. If I was in at that 1,500 calories and I say, okay, I'm not looking to lose additional fat right now. I'm just gonna like want a little bit more room, whatever it is. Then you go back up to whatever your maintenance calories is, 1,900, 2,000 calories, something like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
you just go along the way. So it's 2,000, 2,340, 2,450. But you can
Mm-hmm.
also just, how do I do this? How do I track my progress? You're not going to do measurements because that doesn't make any sense, right? So
No.
this is going to be how you feel, right? This is going to be how you feel. The ones that you can kind of still sort of measure in terms of, hey, am I gaining body fat or am I gaining, weight via pregnancy, are going to be the places where you're going to store fat that are not really related to your belly, and that would be your arms and your legs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're not going to do your chest. You're not going to do your belly or any of that, your hips. All of those things are going to shift naturally during pregnancy. But you could look at your arms as another gauge of like, hey, am I doing too many? Am I not? I'm also not saying that you need to track your calories, but if you were, that would be what it would be. But 340 calories is like a portion or two of carbs and fats. 450 is a third. So it's like 2 portions, 3 portions if you're doing the portion method. Um, but the idea behind that is we oftentimes, like, I'm eating for two, right? That's not two. Okay. Like,
No.
you're eating for an adult and a fetus.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that fetus does need additional calories, and you don't want to, be too light on that. But we do want to make sure that we're eating a sufficient amount, but we also
Mm-hmm.
don't need to go over the top in terms of eating for two here, because that's where we can get into some issues on the other side and
Right.
on the heels of pregnancy. That was a lot. That was a lot of information.
But you did good.
I feel pretty good about it.
I feel good.
I feel pretty good about it.
And I feel cold, but
Yeah. So again, I wanna kind of wrap this up with a bow here as best I can. Obviously, this was not all encompassing. I tried to hit as many points as I could. A lot of this is unique, and I say if there was ever a time for you to have a coach, pregnancy would definitely be one of them, because again, these are general principles, but everybody's different, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
it's not like if you have twins, all of a sudden that number bumps from 340 right up to 680 and it's exactly the same, right? So
Mm-hmm.
some of this is having somebody kind of walking alongside of it with you. Having a coach is super duper valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously listen to your doctor, advocate for yourself. If you are the spouse of somebody who's pregnant, advocate for them.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that there are very few moments where there are very few things to get me to become an unpleasant version of myself. And um, when I'm advocating for my wife, uh, my leash is short on
Mm-hmm.
that. If Megan doesn't feel like she's being supported in the way that she needs to, particularly by medical professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that we want to do, not do it for her. And then again, remember, like, pregnancy is a really cool time. It's a unique time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you are not weak during pregnancy. You're also not indestructible, but you're not weak during pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's going to be different. And so the primary goal is keep you and baby as healthy as possible
Mm-hmm.
and be ready to rock and roll into that fourth trimester and beyond. So that's where we will start our next episode, which will be fourth trimester. We'll talk about pelvic floor health. We'll talk about diastasis recti, and why I really don't like the phrase "get your body back." A little teaser there.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
I think you could probably guess why I don't like that phrase. But I appreciate you all listening. If you got all the way to the end of this and you didn't get my pregnancy guide, like if you're listening to this in, October or 2 years from now, just send me a message, pregnancy guide, and I'll send it to you. It has kind of the highlights of these things. I've yet to write it, but it will have the highlights of these things. And we will chat with you on the next episode. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.